Hi guys. Oh my gosh, I feel like I say this all the time, but I have not been on live in a minute. Actually, since we had volunteers. Hi. I'm going to let a few people join before I get started. Hi guys. Okay, I want to preface. So Instagram is really weird now where they won't let accounts under 1,000 followers to have a IG live. And I think that's so wrong because there's so many small organizations that are doing amazing work and we can't collaborate now. So we figured out a way. Tell your friends to join. Hi. I'm going to give a few minutes for people to join and then I'll get started and have Luke join. Hi guys. Let me see. I hope you guys are having a good day. Let's see. Okay, perfect. Okay, Luke, I'm gonna get started and then I will let you join. Hi, you guys. Okay. So, hi, everyone. Welcome back to Watered Down. I'm Riley Kay, the creator of Watered Down, the founder. If you don't know what Watered Down is a climate justice project I started a few years ago, maybe in 2021. Just because I was like, people have heard climate change, but they don't know the environmental issues that feed into it. So I was like, let's water that junk down. Hi you guys. So now fast forward, maybe like 4 years later, we have volunteers that are helping out, our amazing volunteers. We have some amazing work happening behind the scenes. I can't wait for you guys to see, but overall, our purpose, we're dedicated to educating people about climate change. So breaking it down in layman's terms for everybody to understand, while also supporting frontline communities. As an African American, that's really important to me. It's the lens that I see the world. So I thought it was very important for Watered Down to have that similar lens of supporting frontline communities and marginalized communities, but then also reimagining climate solutions, right? So there's so many amazing activists and people that are actually doing amazing climate work. And I feel as though, the solution's already there. We just have to start talking about it more. So I'm excited for this conversation today. I actually am going to introduce our guest speaker and then I'll have them join. So this person, so preface, let me give you a little background. So I was doing a little, I like to read the news in regards to climate change. And one of the articles that I read was about the Colorado River and a management crisis that was happening. And I'm like, I don't know nothing about it. And so they linked someone that I was like, oh, let me see if I can talk with them. So that's Luke Runyon. He's the co-director of the Water Desk, a journalism initiative at the University of Colorado, Boulder Center for Environmental Journalism, that focuses on Western water in the Colorado Basin. In 2017, he launched the Colorado River Reporting Project at KUNC, the NPR station for Northern Colorado, where he hosted and reported the podcast Thirst Gap, Learning to Live with Less on the Colorado River. I've listened to it. It's amazing. You guys should go check it out. He currently serves as the president of the Society of Environmental Journalists. So I'm going to invite Luke on and then we'll get started. Let's see. Water.
Hi,
Hi,
Riley.
how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with me. It's so important.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, okay. So we can get started. I just maybe I gave people a little bit of background on you, but if you want to tell people a little bit about yourself and what you're passionate about.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Luke Runyon, and I'm a journalist, and I'm based here in Western Colorado. I work for the Water Desk, which is based at the University of Colorado in Boulder. I'm about 4 hours drive west in a city called Grand Junction, which is right on the Colorado River. Um, And I've been reporting on water issues pretty exclusively since 2017, which is when I started covering the Colorado River as a beat. Um, and have spent most of my career in public radio, reporting on a bunch of different topics, but have ended up in water and environmental issues for the last little bit of my career. Um, and my position now at the water desk at the University of Colorado, I work with news organizations and journalists throughout the West, particularly in the Colorado River Basin and in the Rio Grande River Basin, to increase the quality and quantity of water-related journalism. And so this is a topic area that is close to my heart. You know, I spent quite a few years focusing in on water issues, and I'm excited to share what I know.
Yes, thank you. I think when people think of Colorado, they think of your football team now. So to now know that you guys are doing amazing work on the climate side, I'm really excited to learn more.
Yeah, football is way out of my wheelhouse. I can talk a lot about water. I know very little about football.
Okay, so first off, I did a video a few days ago with me like getting ready and telling people some fun stats, or not even fun, but just how critical the Colorado River is in the Western U.S. Um, could you maybe tell people a little bit about it? I know, or first, tell our audience why the Colorado River is drying up and maybe how climate change is a factor in that.
Yeah. Maybe I'll start with just like a lay of the land, and then I can
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how the climate effects are playing out here. So the Colorado River is about a 1,400-mile river. It starts high up in the Rocky Mountains here in Colorado. Another large tributary starts up in Wyoming,
Okay.
um, and they're mostly snow-fed rivers that all feed into the Colorado River basin. And the entire watershed you can kind of think of as like the American Southwest. So it's the states that rely on the Colorado River: Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada. The
Hmm.
country of Mexico also uses some Colorado River water, so that
Oh,
makes this
wow.
an international issue as
Yeah.
well. It's not just the United States. Um, Within that watershed, you also have 30 federally recognized tribes that
Okay.
rely on the river in varying capacities. Um, and then the river itself flows through some of the kind of the most iconic American landscapes that you can think of. You know, it
Yeah.
carved the Grand Canyon. There's, several other national parks that the river flows through. When you're thinking of like the, red rock, flat top mesas, like that's the landscape where this river really originates and flows through, along with like the snow-capped peaks in Colorado and Wyoming. So it's an incredibly scenic area.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous, but beyond just its aesthetic beauty and its ecology, it also has become kind of the lifeblood of the entire region when it comes to its economy, to its
Yeah.
cities. So, about 40 million people rely on the Colorado River in some capacity, for drinking water or irrigation. And that's a 1 in 10 Americans. So, even though it's, a relatively small area and a small river,
That's
like
huge.
it has a huge
Yeah.
reach. Um, and it irrigates millions of acres of farmland. There's a really good chance if you're eating a romaine salad in winter, that lettuce came from an area that was irrigated by the Colorado River. These are desert landscapes, and so they
Yeah.
can be highly productive farmland when you're adding irrigation water to it. So, this, and I guess too, you should think of some of the cities that rely on this river as well. You have Los Angeles,
Yeah.
Phoenix, Denver, Salt Lake City, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Like a lot of the major cities in the Southwest rely on the river in some capacity.
Yeah.
And so, really, when you start adding up all of the different facts about the river, it's easy to see why it becomes a really relevant topic for this region because it's
Yeah.
so heavily relied upon. So the big challenge that's taking place on the river right now is we have a large gap between the water supply and the demand for water. So the way that this shows up generally is in the large reservoirs that we've constructed on the Colorado River.
Hmm.
The two largest reservoirs in the country are on the Colorado. That's Lake Mead down near Las
Okay.
Vegas and Lake Powell on the Utah-Arizona border. And those reservoirs are meant to act as a reserve, really to kind of store up water in times of scarcity. But pretty much since for like the last 25 years, those reservoirs have been declining and unable to recover the water that they have had. And that's because we draw them down and there's not enough water to fill them back up.
Yeah.
And so the demand is holding steady while the supply of water is actually getting smaller or shrinking. And that's because warming temperatures in our region are changing the type of precipitation that falls. We're getting more rain instead of snow, even though snow
Okay.
is really what kind of drives the whole system. Um, and so we're reducing the amount of snow that's falling in the mountains. We're also just kind of changing the way that the water cycle functions in the Southwest.
Right.
So all of those things combined are creating this water management crisis that's going on in our region.
Yeah. When I read the article, I saw that the whole like hydrological system of no, like not a lot of snow, but there's more water. I think a lot of people think, okay, but if it's raining more, like shouldn't it be? And it's like, no, like, the snow after it would melt trickles down into that river. And I don't think people, so I'm glad you explained it, like how people understand that process.
Yeah, snow is really kind of a critical piece of how the Colorado River functions because it collects high up in the mountains, and then when it melts, it kind of creates a long, slow, drawn out runoff that makes it easier for water to be managed and metered out. And when you have it come as rain, it's these kind of flashier events that makes it a lot harder to capture and put into reservoirs or have it end up in streams. And so yeah, the snowpack is a really huge part of the story in the Colorado River Basin.
Mm. Um, so what is this management crisis I've been hearing about? I know that for those that don't know, he talked about the upper and lower basin of the different states that actually use that water, right? So all of them actually have a management plan of how, am I correct, of how they actually use this water?
Yeah, so the Colorado River is managed by a whole series of legal agreements that have taken place since 1922, which is when the original Colorado River Compact was signed amongst all of the seven states that I had mentioned. And I guess one of the things that the Colorado River Compact did was that it put a certain amount of water on paper promised to those states, to the
Mm,
users in those states,
okay.
which is not really how rivers function. Like,
Like you
especially,
get a piece, you get a piece, you get, yeah, no.
well, it's like it changes year to year how much water is
Yeah,
actually available from these rivers. But when you have a fixed number on a page, that becomes a promise to
yeah.
water users, which is really hard to break yourself from at a certain point and learn how to live within what the limits of that river really are. So that was the original agreement, 1922. on top of that, we've built a whole legal scaffolding for how to manage this river. And there's, dozens of agreements and Supreme Court cases and, you name it, treaties. So the latest agreement that people are talking about is an update to a set of guidelines that were agreed to in 2007.
Okay.
So way back then, the states got together and they realized, like, oh man, things are really looking rough on the Colorado River. There's not enough water. We need to agree on how we will manage a shortage. Like, we know that there's not enough water. How do we manage shortages on the Colorado River? Well, they did. They came up with this agreement, and they said, "All right, in 20 years, we should come back and update these guidelines for how we're managing the large reservoirs on the Colorado River." And so here we are. We're almost 20 years later,
Yeah.
and there's been broad agreement that the guidelines that were used in 2007 didn't go far enough, really didn't anticipate exactly how bad things could get on the river. And so now the states are all locked in very intense negotiations
Yeah.
over how to deal with a dwindling Colorado River water supply and not coming up with great solutions on how to do that in a way that feels fair and equitable amongst all of the various
Right.
characters and water users that are dependent on it.
I it's funny because I was listening to your podcast, and part of it was how the Colorado River, before this pact, was a raging river. Like, this river was, if I'm using the words correctly, it was a dangerous river, actually. So to now think that it is dwindled down is kind of sad, because it's almost like we're placing what we want, our desires on this river when it's like that's not what it was intended for, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you think of like the large dams that are on the Colorado River, like Hoover Dam near Las Vegas. It's this iconic piece of American infrastructure. Um, but it changed fundamentally how the Colorado River functions from a wild, raging river that could wipe out whole towns and, just kind of like jump its banks and go and, it was a
Yeah.
big wild river. And when you put a large dam on a river, it just changes fundamentally how that river functions. It meters the water out more slowly. You don't get those high peaks and low lows. It's just kind of
Yeah.
like a slow, steady flow, which
Right.
is not necessarily how rivers were ecologically meant to function.
I or the next question was, and why is this new plan so important for the future of the Colorado River? I think, you kind of brushed on it a little bit of how all of these states kind of rely on this river. So if this plan, and I think when I was reading the article, it said they needed to have it by 2026, or was it the end of this year?
End of like basically midway through 2026 is when they need to have it in place, like end
Okay.
of the summer 2026, in order for it to be in place in 2027.
Okay. And what will happen if they can't come up? I was reading it. It was like the Secretary of Interior will implement their own plan. I'm like, I don't know if that's like the best option. So, what do you think will happen?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a few different options. I mean, there's tons of uncertainty around this. So I'm not any authority of like what the future is going to hold.
Of course.
But I guess there's a few avenues that this could go. So one that you just mentioned is the federal government. This is kind of a long-term tension that has existed on the river is the states versus the federal government, who sometimes come together and agree on things, and other times the federal government kind of acts as a catalyst to get the conversation moving. So
Okay.
the states often have their own set of interests, like California has a huge agricultural industry in Southern
Yeah.
California. They've got the metro area of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So their interests are very different from Wyoming, the least populated state, but they both rely on the same river.
Yeah.
So they're kind of always at loggerheads a little bit of the states of trying to feel like, well, my interests matter more
It's
than
more.
yours, or
Yeah.
yes, it's like, so you get lots of finger pointing in some of these negotiations of who's wasting water, who's using too much, who's going to grow, who's not going to grow. But really, the state leaders see this as like their future. You know,
Okay.
this to them, water, access to water in a very arid region means that's your future. That's your
Right.
future residential development. That's your future industrial development. That's your future economy. That's your future agricultural
Right.
products. Um, and so it's really easy to transform the conversation around water into what's the future of the state of Colorado, the future of the state of Wyoming. Um, and so they get really heated because everyone wants to have influence over what the future of their state is.
Yeah.
But the dynamic between the federal government and the states is right now is the federal government will come in and say, all right, you know, we manage these large dams. They manage Hoover Dam, they manage Glen Canyon Dam at Lake Powell, and they'll say we can't let these things go empty.
Right.
Essentially, like our responsibility is to make sure that there is hydroelectricity, that there's enough water stored. And uh, when you have that kind of dynamic between the states that are all kind of having their own parochial interests, their own narrow interests, versus the federal government, which is saying, like, we need to protect this infrastructure.
Right.
Um, Very often it means the federal government is coming in and telling the states, like, you guys need to figure out what to do about this particular problem. In this case, that means cutting water use. Who has to use less and under what condition, um, which is a really painful conversation to have when you have grown up economies and agricultural regions and whole cities that are dependent on the Colorado River. And now all of a sudden people feel like the rug is getting pulled out from
Right.
underneath them, saying, like, oh, you actually can't have it all. You have to use less. There's not
Right.
enough. So who amongst you is going to be the one who has to feel that cut?
Yeah.
And so it's a very painful conversation, I think, for the entire region of realizing the limits of a natural resource and saying, like, all right, who has to make the hard decision to cut their water use?
Oh my goodness. I you explained it perfectly. I think when I think about these tough conversations, I also think about the communities that don't get a say in those conversations or at that table. And in your podcast, one of the episodes you talk with, you said, first off, you said the Colorado River spans over 7 states and over 30 federally recognized tribes, right?
30 tribes, yeah.
I worked with a few tribes in the Pacific Northwest, and it just the conversation was always, they're not at the table a lot of times, and I think when we have this conversation, it's funny that you say like in 1920 the pack was created, and I'm like, okay, there were some people that were managing that beforehand. So what does that conversation look like, or are tribes even in this conversation at all?
I think it depends on which tribe you're talking about, because
Okay.
I would say some tribes are more included than others.
Okay.
And a lot of it depends on how much access to water do those tribes have. So if you're a tribe and you have access to a lot of Colorado River water, that gives you some opportunity to participate in some of the negotiations around the solutions to the Colorado
Okay.
River crisis. But I would say, in general, tribes have not been included in the same capacity as states. And I think this is something that you hear from tribal leaders often, is them saying, we're sovereign nations. We should
Yeah.
have the same level of voice in these conversations that sovereign states
Absolutely. Yeah.
have. And they don't feel like that has ever really occurred on the Colorado River. Most of the discussions where you're talking about like where the brass tacks are getting hammered out and like agreements are getting agreed to, a lot of that is happening between the seven states, among
Okay.
those core seven states. And then sometimes you'll have the table grow a little larger. You'll have more tribal voices, you'll have more environmental voices, or you'll hear from the recreation industry. But really, for the most part, like when the rubber meets the road on like what is getting agreed to on the Colorado River, it's happening amongst those seven states, generally behind closed doors before it gets rolled out to
Yeah.
the public, which is really unfortunate. As a journalist, it always kind of raised my hackles um, that a lot of the like core discussions around the river are not open to the public,
Yeah.
and it's just a really unfortunate part of the way that the Colorado River functions. And I wish it wasn't that way.
Yeah. I'm glad that you covered it in your podcast, because I don't think that wouldn't have been that information wouldn't have been available. I don't think the states would have even offered that type of information out there. So I think the work that you do is extremely important. um, what are some solutions? Because in your podcast, everybody preface, go watch, go read it, go listen to it. Thirst Gap: Learning to Live with Less on the Colorado River. You speak with people in various regions of the Colorado River, with different occupations, homeowners, farmers. I even remember a part of the podcast, a homeowner, she couldn't do her boat anymore because there were like rocks in the region. And I'm like, this is you don't think about recreational activities,
Mhm.
um, and then indigenous tribes and conservationists. What are some solutions that you've heard of that could solve the water crisis happening?
Yeah, I think it depends on which set of water users you're talking about and where they exist on the river. But you know, let's maybe start with agriculture.
Okay.
Farmers use the vast majority of the Colorado River's water, somewhere between 75 and 80% of the water that exists in the Colorado River is used by agriculture. So if you're looking at like, oh, we need to like make cutbacks, you go to the like biggest bucket first and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, like let's look at what agriculture can do. And I think there's a few different things that you can do. And it depends on where, again, if you're in the high country here in Colorado versus way down the river in like Arizona and California. But they have tested out some of these programs where they basically pay farmers to not plant some of their ground. um, and so this can be public. These are generally public funds, coming from states or the federal government, basically paying farmers to leave some of their land fallow, not planting it for a season, and then they wouldn't be using the irrigation water that they would be legally entitled to, but there's no crops to grow. And so they just leave that water and it goes down and fills up some of these reservoirs. Drawbacks are it's very expensive and it's probably not going to save enough water to actually save the whole system. It's one
Yeah.
piece,
Yeah.
but it's not a silver bullet. And now it's increasingly difficult to find public money to do these kinds of programs. And so the future of some of these conservation programs, particularly in agriculture, very challenging right now because no one really knows where the funding is going to come from if they want to bring those back. Um, on the municipal side of things, so big cities, a lot more resources than an individual farmer, and so they generally have the staff and the funding to pull off like big scale conservation programs. And a lot of them do have conservation programs. So, you look at a city like Las Vegas, which I featured in the podcast. They've been very aggressive in their conservation programming, to the point where they have now made certain kinds of grass illegal. And not just that you can't put it in, but that you have to rip it out. So if you have certain kinds
Is
of
it out
grass
there?
now in Las Vegas, like it's illegal. As of next year, it'll be illegal, and you won't be able to use Colorado River water to water it. Um, and they kind of coined this term non-functional turf, which basically means, um, grass that is purely aesthetic or just for an ornamental reason, not like a soccer field or something like that, but like the strips of grass like in a median, in a road, or like in a
Hmm.
roundabout, or like those are gone. They're getting ripped out all over Las Vegas because they
No.
use a lot of water to keep them
Yeah.
alive. And so a city has a few, tools that it can use to rein in use, and one of those is outdoor water use and ripping out lawns because it uses a ton of water. You can also do other programs like paying people to swap out the toilets that they have in their homes, or other sorts of efficiencies,
Like small
and
incentives.
small incentives. Or you can swing big and go for big infrastructure. So in some cities now, they're looking more at water recycling plants. So basically taking the water that you have and recycling it, using it again for drinking water. And there's a lot more of that that's going on, a lot more investment in water recycling. Um, a lot of times people start thinking of these kind of like fanciful ideas of like, oh, we should build a pipeline from the Great Lakes to Colorado, or we should, do crazy weather modification, or, these are not really serious solutions. Really, the solution in our region is learning how to rein in our demand much
Right.
more than it is about increasing the supply, because we're not going to be able to increase the supply. We have to learn how to live with less water from the Colorado River. That's what we have. Like, we have total control over what our demand for water looks
Right.
like. And so that's really where a lot of the solutions lie.
Yeah. Someone said plant native plants for the win. Yes. Native
Yeah.
plants for the win. I think
Yes,
people
I have no grass at my house. I'll say for the record. I have a bunch of sage and rabbit brush in my front yard. So
and I
doing my part.
yeah, I think people I don't know. And we think about it sometimes. We have a conversation all the time when I talk with people in the field of how, like, environmentalism really started a lot of times people just wanting to get away from their region, right? They want this type of escape, right? And I think when you live in an arid region like the Western U.S., it looks different than other people's landscapes. Like, you don't have the grass that Florida would have, or you don't, like, so I think if people if people accepted where they live and the native plants that grow there, I think that it could possibly make it more um, impactful.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, we're not having carpets of green grass here without a lot of water. Like, you got to water the heck out of that grass in order to keep it alive here. I mean, this I don't know how much rain you get where you live, but if you're in Las Vegas, you get 4 inches of precipitation a year annually. That's throughout the entire year. You get 4 inches of rain. So nothing's really growing there if it's not getting watered, you know?
Yeah, no, Florida's definitely different. Like, every
Yeah.
day, maybe at 2 o'clock, we get a nice little rain. So definitely
Not here.
different.
Not here.
Um, okay, awesome. So we have just a few more questions, Luke. So we talked about what communities have been left out of the management plan. What would, and this is like a end all be all, because I think sometimes people don't understand how dire the situation is, right? I think until a community faces it, I think then they say, "Oh, like, this is important. This is impactful. We got to get the word out." And I do think that spreading the news beforehand and telling people this is extremely important to your community, and even, that's why I'm excited that we could talk, because communities need to support other communities, especially regionally, right? I feel
Mhm.
like the East Coast, I don't hear anybody in my circle talking about this issue, but I like, this is important. More people need to be talking about this. Um, so what would the extinction of the Colorado River do to our nation as far as food and energy? Because you talked about those dams, right? And I don't think people think about that either. Like, our electricity, a lot of that region's electricity comes from this river as well. So what would that look like?
It would be a terrifying future if if the Colorado River were to get so low that it couldn't keep flowing through some of those regions. Um, I mean, I would say we're not at the stage yet where we're talking about having a dry riverbed from Colorado to the Mexico border. What we're talking about is areas of the river that are getting so stressed because they're running low and hot. And we're talking about these large reservoirs getting very low, and not able to store the amount of water that they have in the past. And so the loss of hydropower production, like you just mentioned, that's real. That's like a plausible future scenario, particularly for Lake Powell, within the next year, 2 years, if we continue to have dry conditions. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, like this whole region really depends on this river in a large way. And so, if it were to go away, I think you'd start having, or at least in a significantly diminished capacity, you would you'd have to have some very hard conversations about what the future of agriculture looks like in the
Right.
Southwest, what the future of municipal growth and the growth in some of these large cities looks like. So we're not there yet, but
Yeah.
if the warming and drying trends that we've seen continue, I think it's going to get real rough for some of those reservoirs and for the river itself.
Well, Luke, I don't want to end on a horrible bad note, but somebody just
Yikes!
said Jacksonville gets over 50 inches of rain. So compared to four, that's actually crazy. Thank you, Jimmy. That's actually the executive director of St. John's Riverkeeper. So a
Oh,
river
nice.
in Florida that is very critical to our region. So
Yeah,
um, yeah, I one last question because I love podcasts. Will you continue the work of Thirst Gap? Or are there going to be more episodes, or what does that look like?
that's that's my hope. I would
Okay.
love to do another season. It's just it. I don't know if this came through in the show, but the podcast wasn't just like me talking. I think sometimes you listen to podcasts and it's like, oh, it's just like some guy talking. um this was like, I spent a ton of time on the road, did a lot of
Yeah.
reporting, talked to a lot of different people, worked with an editor over months to put it all together, and so all of that just takes time and energy and money, and so it's figuring out how to piece all of those together to do another season. But I would love to. I had such a fun time putting it together.
Yes, we got to get everyone. If you know anybody, tell them that we need support so he can keep
Yes.
doing this work. Yeah. I I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much, Luke. I really do think that if more people collaborated and talked about climate issues that our nation faces, I think that climate solutions would not come easy, but they would be more collaborative. Oh,
Yeah, no, no, I totally agree. And I think too, this is one thing that I noticed just in paying attention to environmental issues nationally, is it's really easy to kind of point the finger at another region of the country that's dealing with a natural disaster or some sort of natural resource issue,
yeah,
and feel like, oh, well, that's your fault for living in the desert, or that's your fault for living in Hurricane Alley, or
I
that's your
hate that.
fault for, and like our whole country, like there's no safe place. Every region has its own natural resource
Yeah,
constraints and issues. And the Southwest happens to be water scarcity. That
yeah,
doesn't mean that no one should live here. We just
right.
have to learn how to live within a constrained system. And in our
Yeah,
case, that means water scarcity and learning how to live with what we have when it comes to water resources. But we can do it. We can do it.
yes, yes, we
Yeah.
can. Somebody just asked what is the podcast called. If you want to tell them or give any other information you want other people to know about.
Yeah, it's called Thirst Gap: Learning to Live with Less on the Colorado River. You can find it on Spotify or Apple or wherever. Um, and it's a 6 episode treatment of issues along the Colorado River. It came out a couple years ago, so forgive me if like a couple things are a little dated. It came out in 2023, and yeah, I'm hoping to update it in the next little bit. And yeah, thanks so much for the conversation. This was fantastic. I had a great time chatting with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I everyone, if please, we okay, this is a prep. Everybody, Instagram is being really, they're being really mean about policies and how we can collaborate with one another on here. So let's get watered down to 1,000 followers so we can actually have our lives on watered down, because this is my personal page and I don't mind, but I want more people to see the environmental issues that we're covering over there. So tell your friends about it. Follow the water desk. Follow
Yep.
Luke. What else, Luke? Should they follow Colorado? Do you have a environmental journalism page?
I think we do. I don't know how much it's updated, but yeah, with the Center for Environmental Journalism, I would say too, give a shout out to the Society of Environmental Journalists. I was on the board there for several years, and if anybody's interested in environmental journalism, it's a great organization to be a part of, to learn about. Not they don't just deal with water; they've got reporters who cover energy and air quality and all the issues that run the gamut on the environmental beat. And so that's another great organization too.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Luke. I hope that we cross paths. I plan to maybe have a visit out there, so if we can connect, that would be amazing.
Yeah, come on out. I mean, like I said, we got the Colorado River right in town. Like I could be there within 5 minutes, so I could show you the
Perfect.
river.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much, and I hope you guys enjoyed our talk. Share it, and then we hope to see you next time.
Thanks so much, Riley.
Bye, Luke.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.